Greeting of the day, everyone. I'm privileged to welcome you all in the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SGR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I'm Sanjeevani Mishra, delighted to be your anchor for today's session, writing fiction and short stories by Miss Indira Chandrashekhar in conversation with Swati Naidu. Dr. Indira Chandrashekhar started writing story when she returned to India after many years of living abroad. It is as if a re-immersion in her heritage and the vibrancy of life in the country triggered a cascade within her. Until then, she worked as a scientist with biological molecules, in addition to the cultural resources of family and ancestry. Her stories are influenced by the big question about life as well as being a writer and a scientist. She is a founder and principal editor of Out of Print, one of the primary platforms of short fiction, bearing connection of the Indian subcontinent, an anthology marking 10 years of magazines platform magazine was published in December 2020 and celebrate writing from the Indian subcontinent. Indira is a literary curator and literature at the Kala Ghoda Arts Festival in Mumbai. Her fiction has appeared in anthologies and literary journals around the world, and she has published a collection of short stories, Polymorphism. It is an honor to have you with us, Indira ma'am, and this gets even more delightful as we have Miss Swaima Ahmed, who will be in conversation with her as the moderator. Swaima Ahmed is an entrepreneur, international soft skill trainer, event manager, and a TEDx speaker. She is the founder of Finance Academy and Training, co-founder of Footprint Event Private Limited, a pan-India company engaged in training and development. In, course of, in due course of her professional journey, she has conducted more than 3,000 corporate workshops on soft skills. She also serves as trainer for Dell, ITC, Cello, Luxor, Junior Molex, National Stock Exchange, White House Junior, Classmate, and Manipal University. She is also the founder and host of a TED show, the Forever Fear Show. She has won more than 500 competitions and always been an active part of various oratorical competitions, institutional events, youth festival, youth parliament as chief guest speaker, juror member. She holds many rewards and accolades under her belt, including winner of debate and Shin member. Champions at the National Festival, Best Student Award for 2015-16 at RTN Nagpur University, Gold medalist in MA English. She also represents India at the South Asian University Youth Fest as an Indian delegate for literary events in 2016-2018. She is currently a PhD scholar in English literature on the theme of rhetorics. Once again, welcome you, ma'am. And I welcome you, Swaima, ma'am. Before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Western Publication as the association is valuable to Orange City Literature Festival. Now, my dear audience, you are about to hear and experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I humbly invite Swaima ma'am to lead us ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's a cheerful welcome that we bring to you this afternoon with the hopes, dreams, and aspirations that we all share. Welcome to the Orange City Literature Festival. And for us, it's an absolute honor and delight to welcome Miss Indira Chandrashekhar ma'am with us. And as you've heard the introduction, she's someone who's making a mark in the literary domain. And I'm sure it's going to be an absolutely fun-filled, insightful, and wise conversation that we'll have right now. So, welcome, ma'am. It's time for us to get started. So, ma'am, could you please tell us something about your background, something about your environment, your educational background, your experiences, and how these experiences actually impacted your journey as a writer, as a contributor, as an author, and basically as a literary figure?
Well, thank you. Well, before I answer your wonderful and all-encompassing question, Swaima, which is sort of like the history of my entering into literature, I'd like to thank the Orange City Literature Festival. I mean, for all of us, Nagpur Oranges carried us through the winters, and so to be part of the Orange City Festival is terribly exciting. I'll come in a moment also to another connection my family has with Nagpur. But before I get to that, I do want to say a big, big thank you for this invitation, and also acknowledge Westland Publishing and all the wonderful people there for supporting this book and this anthology. So I'm going to start by showing off this anthology, which is a collection of stories from 10 years of Out of Print magazine, which I've been running obviously for a little over 10 years now. It's 30 of the stories from the magazine that are in the print edition. The rest of the magazine is online, partly because I'm really dreadful at going to the printers and saying, oh, align it right. And then I get so freaked out when it's, slightly off. Well, to get to your question, Swaima, I started my life in science, but I come from a family which is, my father was a scientist, and my mother was an artist and a writer. And so I think I had this combination of influences all through my life. And I was working in science quite seriously in computational biophysics for many years, and looking at the ways in which biological molecules affect human systems and other living systems. And then I had been living all over the place, the US, Switzerland, and so on. And then I moved back to India. And coming here, I think you just realign with your roots, you realign with who you are. And for me, it just triggered this need to start writing. And I took a short sabbatical, which I'm still on, from science. And so many years later, here I am, still writing. And I think the influence of living back in India, but also then living in Mumbai, which is a city I had only visited, never really lived in, the vibrancy of that city and the very particular energy it has also influenced a lot of my writing. And of course, much of it comes from much deeper and from earlier, when you are thinking about your family and your origins and all the little freaky stories you hear from your grand aunts, and then you fictionalize them and you turn them into something else. I'm going to leap into a little slide now, if I can possibly get that to all work beautifully. And that is to share what it is that the connection between, I'm just trying to make this into a view which is nice. Give me a moment. Here we are. The connection between my family and Nagpur. It seems like a good moment to bring it up, if you'll bear with me. My father actually spent his school days, there we go, spent his school and college days in Nagpur, and he was a pioneering scientist. He began the field of liquid crystal research in India and soft matter science. And but he got his formative education in physics, in science at Nagpur University, and at some ridiculously young age he finished his BSc honors and was a gold medalist in 1950, and then moved to Bangalore to work with his uncle, Sir C.V. Raman, who had established the Raman Institute by then. And in fact, he was Raman's first student. but we always, the family always feels this great connection to Nagpur. And of all the many gold medals, which I was so proud to take out of, their little secure spaces and take pictures uh, of all the many medals and accolades and prizes he received, I think he valued this very much for those early days in Nagpur, and also for the friendships he formed at that time. So thank you for bearing with that little story.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Honestly, it's heartwarming to see this subtle connection that you have with Nagpur. And as I mentioned earlier, truly a delight once again to cast a glance at this similitude. Moving on, ma'am, could you please tell us something more about your initiative that is Out of Print magazine? What exactly is the agenda of the Out of Print magazine, and how do you think is this initiative impacting the lives of your readers in general?
Moved, as I said, back to India and started writing, I was trying to place my fiction. And this little story is out there in many interviews and so on, but I'll just repeat it to set a context. And I had grown up with things like the Illustrated Weekly and Femina, and suddenly they were no longer on our maps. And I did submit to a couple of places in India, but I thought I was starting to submit abroad as well. And it felt to me as if the view that editors had outside of India, and this is a bit of a generalization, obviously one shouldn't, it doesn't apply to everybody. It seemed that they were looking for an exotic view of India. They wanted stories with peacocks and maharajas and, tigers walking the streets and exotic and dreadful things happening to women and so on and so forth. And all of those are, are valid things to want to investigate, but contemporary Indian writing was moving in so many different directions, and the streets and the exotic and dreadful things happening to women and so on and so forth. And all of those are, are valid things to want to investigate, but contemporary Indian writing was moving in so many different directions. And having started writing, I met many young contemporary writers as well. And I just felt the need for a platform. And so I started talking about starting this magazine. I think in 2008, it was at the Jaipur Literature Festival. It had been in my head already. But in 2008, I started talking to my daughter, Meera Brunner, and my niece, Samhita Arni, both of whom are, in art and writing in different ways. And I said, let's start a magazine. And they were enthusiastic. But then, the world crashed, the economy fell, all kinds of things happened. And in 2010, we finally put it together. And the agenda is very much to therefore provide a platform for writing for people writing from the subcontinent, the entire subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent. So that includes India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., Nepal, Bhutan, so on and so forth. And, you can extend the circle as you wish. And also the diaspora. So we have writing coming in from largely the North American subcontinent, but also Indian writers living in Australia, in Africa, in, really Europe, and so on and so forth. So we have every continent represented as well. And I think it just provides a sort of one of my investigations, and which I think I realize now was rather naive, but at that time was well, it's not naive as much as it needs to be refined, the question. But the question was, what is our commonality? We all have such shared history, mythology, ancient connections, roots we've walked together, from the Silk Road to the Vedas to, various cultures that have come onto the subcontinent and enriched it. And what is that commonality? And that was one of the questions I was asking, where will that influence contemporary writing? but it's a complex question and needs to be investigated in different slices, perhaps. So, yeah.
Absolutely, ma'am. So, ma'am, narrowing down our discussion right now, I'm sure viewers would love to know from you what exactly is the disparity between a short story and other forms of prose or fiction forms of writing. How will you define it, ma'am?
Thank you for that. I am going to share my screen again. And the reason I'm going to do it is actually because I was trying to think of a title. And one of the things that really I think is a key to representing yourself through fiction is allowing yourself to write about the good and bad and the complex. And when I was thinking about that, I thought, well, let me use a sort of a snazzy title. And so I thought of Phool or Kaante, which is this wonderful movie which has everything in it. It's love, it's romance, it's revenge, it's crime, it's the mafia, it's what's not represented on this wonderful poster is also motorcycles. And so, I thought about this, the plots that are in mainstream cinema. And one of the things that emerges is that in mainstream cinema, like in a novel, you have like a huge world that you create, and you have multiple characters. Of course, you have one or two main characters, but you have multiple characters. You follow their lives, they're intertwined, there's a lot of emotion. But I think what happens in short fiction is you press out, as it were, from this huge, complex, layered world, you press out more or less a single situation. You sort of look at just a single character or a relationship or a setting or a situation, but you identify the essence of something in it, and then you examine that and you analyze that to the extent possible. And of course, there's no real prescription or formula. I mean, I noticed that on the roster for the festival, you have many wonderful short story writers. There's Kripa Gay, there's Meghna Pant, there's Kulpreet Yadav, a host of others. And so each of them might have a completely different take on the short story. But to me, what seems to me is really extracting the essence of a situation. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to do a little reading to just sort of illustrate what I'm, talking about through one of the stories in Out of Print. And it is, if you'll allow me to share the screen again, it is a story by Gangadhar Gadgil, who is a Marathi writer. And so I thought that I would, share this, read from this particular story. It has appeared in Out of Print. We selected it as one of the stories. It's translated by Kirti Ramchandra, and it was originally published as Kadu Ani Gore. And if you'll allow me to just read and tell you a little bit about the story. The thing is, it's set in a joint family. And you have, as in any joint family, you have a mother-in-law, you have sisters-in-laws and brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law, and cousins and visiting cousins, and the young chap who is infatuated, and the young chap who's a nerd, and the young chap who's, so all of these people are weaving in and out of the story. But the story is really about the single character who's in fact telling the story in the first person. She's the protagonist, and it tells you about how she negotiates this complex politics of the joint family, and basically protects herself, sustains herself, triumphs in her relationships, and in her desires. And it's just a wonderful story. I'm just going to read a very short excerpt. I stood in front of the mirror, swaying my body this way and that, like the dancer in the film we had seen the previous day. Wow, very nice, I heard from outside the door. I got such a start. Obviously, the Lord and Master had come back from his morning walk. His movements are like clockwork, precise, hardly make a sound. I went and stood by the corner table, head hanging low, waiting for the next volley, and I tried not to smile. I feel like laughing when he gets annoyed. These foolish men believe that women are afraid of their temper. All you want to do is act coy, not do any housework, quarrel with everyone, tell tales. I covered my mouth with my sari pallu and turned to walk out. I'm not talking to your back. My muffled laughter did not escape his lordship's notice. You have this bad habit of laughing for nothing, he yelled, adding a sharp slap to his words. This was a sign that his anger had dissipated. As I went downstairs, I heard the clock strike 7. It was time for his lordship's bath. I ran to draw his bath water because otherwise I got to the boiler and found it was stone cold. That's senior Zaobai for you. Never completes a chore. What? No coals in the boiler? I asked angrily. If anything is said rudely, Sasubai is sure to hear it. Her ears are very sharp, her tongue even sharper. From the puja room, I heard her say, "Where has she gone, leaving all the housework half done? Shirker of the first order she is." When Sasubai's tirade began, I felt deeply appalled. I should have talked to Zaobai myself. I went inside to check what she was doing and found her lying in the hall. She was looking exhausted. When she saw me, she struggled to get up. I'm feeling very breathless. Once I catch my breath, I'll light the boiler, she said. I felt really bad for her. Che, how can you do any work when you're so tired? I'll make your bed. Lie down for a bit. Don't worry. I'll light the boiler, I told her. Our voices carried to the puja room, of course. Who's that talking in the living room? Is that Annapurna? Sasubai asked. Zaobai once again struggled to get up. I signaled to her to keep lying down and said, "She's getting breathless. I'll light the boiler." "You mean she's happily sleeping away?" Sasubai thundered from the puja room. Zaobai burst into tears. "Yes, I'm the pale-footed, ill-fated one. I swallowed my husband and now I am sitting here and eating for free." She slapped her face a couple of times. I quickly took her hand in mine. I didn't know what to do next. A dry sob escaped me. I stroked her back. "Let me make some tea for you. You'll feel better," I said. Had I remained there, I would have started crying too. No, no, no tea. Why should I feel better? It'll be better if I die, Zaobai said. What can one say to that? I took out the stove quietly and lit it. I'll stop there. The thing is, this story is wonderful because, as I said, it runs through the family. But then you follow this young woman and you discern that she's young and she's playing with her husband as well, And in the end, she triumphs in this relationship and all the different negotiations. And so it's really, although it's a very complex world that's created in the story, it's about her and her trajectory through through those complex layers. So for me, that's a short story in a way.
Absolutely, ma'am. It was quite fascinating. And we're grateful to you actually for adding so much more color and vibrance to your answers, using these scripts and screen shares that you have to share with us. Thank you so much for that glimpse, ma'am. Now we see that most of these short stories basically
reflecting the past decade, I would say. And although many of the stories in it are written maybe before, especially the ones that have been translated, you do have to remember, however, that it was in the last decade that the translator selected the story to say, "I'd like to work on this and transcribe it into English." So even though some of the stories come from an earlier time, they are reflecting the translator's desire in a way to think about an earlier time or to see why it's relevant for the contemporary. So in that sense, I would say that the stories are reflecting very much the past decade. And the past decade has been so full of so many changes in our country. So one of the primary examples to me is the removal of Section 377 from the Constitution and the decriminalization of same-sex love. And suddenly we saw a huge number, just around that time when all of the activism began, we saw a huge number of stories coming in from the queer writing community, transgender community, and suddenly a voice is awakened by sort of the political events in the country. And I think there are many examples like that. That's one of the primary ones. But I, again, perhaps would like to illustrate my point by reading from a story that is very much set in the contemporary moment. It is a story that is not in the anthology because it actually was actually written after and published in one of our later editions. It's by a writer called Chatura Rao, and I'll just pop up the title of the story again on the screen so you can see it. And it's called Delivery, and it's about a delivery man coming to the house. He couldn't say no to a woman customer, it would cost him his job. He carried the heavy sack of things he had packed that morning, following the list on the WhatsApp she had sent. Things to eat and drink, things to use on her baby and on her own body, up her stairs and across her doorway. The sweet, stale smell of his deodorant filled the confined space of the passage that opened into a living room. She motioned towards a room further in, which he took to be the kitchen. She had her head turned, her gaze fixed on the inner room. But then, as if almost against her own volition, she said, "Be careful where you place your feet. The floor caves." Then he saw it. It made him stop and stare, and because he couldn't take the weight of the delivery, he placed it down with a grunt. The floor tiles had been broken through, and a pit had been dug. It was by the arm of a sofa, which, along with some low chairs, sat around a small round table. Framed photos and a bowl of plastic fruit were arranged on the table. Everything was neatly in place, but for the pit, about 2 feet wide. How deep it was, he couldn't tell. So then they have some engagement, the two of them, and then kneeling down, he opened the sack and placed the items one at a time on the living room floor. When he stood up, he was aware that she was standing too close. The virus was highly contagious. At any other time, too, it would be wise to keep his distance from a customer. So then she starts to pay. And even when she pays, she says nothing about the 2 items on her list, in lieu of which he had delivered other things: frozen corn instead of peas, white rice instead of brown. She seemed simply in need of seeing and speaking to someone. He had met customers like her. They tended to begin conversations that weren't necessary. "I lost my child." He blinked, uncomprehending. She went into the pit. "That pit?" She didn't answer. He looked at her closely for the first time. She was pale. Her expression reminded him of his wife's when one of their sons got very sick. "Should I look?" The pit was not deep. No, there was no child inside. But now she was standing next to him, an expectant expression in her eyes. Will you look?" I'll stop there. So that story, is really talking about now. I think this period of lockdown when we were all incarcerated, this was the cover of the magazine in which the story appeared. And I think also reflecting that sort of tension of being isolated, being in lockdown. I think particularly for people who were alone, the kind of nightmare situations that could arise. And so, yes, we've had a lot of stories actually about the corona time and about the lockdown. So this was just an example.
Thank you so much once again, Indira ma'am. We see how this short story was actually a reflection of the COVID times, the pandemic era.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of us can actually relate to the kind of sentiments that we see the protagonist has gone through. Now,
Yes.
coupled with this, we also see that short stories are also an embodiment of life lessons and
Hmm.
explore life meticulously.
Yes.
So, how do you think short stories actually explore life and life lessons?
Yes. I think, in a way, it's a very nuanced way of examining things that are very complicated or difficult in our lives, perhaps also happy. We have a lovely story in the anthology by Chandrahas Chowdhury, where a man goes through really, really difficult day meeting with bureaucracy and being utterly miserable and feeling quite humiliated by all that he goes through. And then he goes and has a lovely meal, and his whole attitude to life changes. So you can have happy stories too, but very often stories are about something which is deeply conflicted. So, for example, when I started writing, one of the stories that was in my collection, which is called Polymorphism, was brought out by HarperCollins, though with the same commissioning editors, Kartika VK and Ajita GS. Thank you so much, both of you. And Rashi Malbhamri, who was my publicist even then. Yes, so in Polymorphism, for example, one of the stories were very much triggered by moving around in Mumbai, not all of them, one or two of them. And one of the stories I wrote at that period, which in fact we decided not to include in the anthology in the end, but which has been published in a literary journal, was triggered by looking at an old man. I would go to drop my children to school of course, in a car, and you're all sort of in this little privileged bubble moving through the streets. But every day I would see this old man who was lying under the flyovers, living there, was obviously very well taken care of. He always had a fresh dhoti and was clean. But he was obviously a little bit senile, or had some old age difficulty, which made it was very obvious. And so that just triggered a story in me, because it was very sad and disturbing to see someone who could have been a parent of yours lying on the street like that, and especially because he was well taken care of. You paid attention, and then that triggered a story that was very much then deviated in a completely different direction, but was very much about examining the idea of someone whose um, idea of life has begun to change, because their body and their minds are changing, and the process that the caregiver goes through as well. So that was, that's one way of talking about life. But there's another, again, if you'll permit me to read. Thank you. If there's time enough, let me know. There's a story that I again set in Bombay, which has appeared in the out of print anthology. And I'm going to keep showing off this book to encourage people to buy it. It's available on Amazon, small plug. It's a story by Jayant Kaikini, who writes very much about Bombay, about Mumbai. He lived there for many years. He writes in Kannada, and this particular one was translated by Pratibha Umashankar Nedigar. And again, I'll share the screen just so there's some information about the story. There we go. It was first published as Hostilu, which means threshold, which is the English name of the story. And so this is set in Bombay, and it's so much about the setting, and through the setting, a whole slice of life emerges. And again, it's not like it offers you a solution. I think there are stories that are written to offer you solutions to problems, that teach you something about life and teach you how to deal with a problem or a conflict or an issue. But I think that many of the literary short stories that I deal with examine the situation and look at it from maybe even from a psychological point of view, and therefore allow you, the reader, to think about the story and maybe not have a solution, but maybe just think about different angles from which to approach something that's difficult. So this is a sort of a love story. Again, I'm just reading a very short excerpt. And so, and I've cut out lots of bits so that I don't take too much time. But it says, if you turned into the last lane of the crowded market, you couldn't miss Muchimia's Murka Dukan. The Murka Dukan was a shop dealing in discarded body parts of dilapidated houses and old furniture, from relics like rusted tin roofs to unhinged window frames, and from worn-out wooden thresholds to a pile of broken and blunt screwdrivers, and everything in between qualified for being stocked there. He goes on to describe even more of the shop, and you're just drawn in. You know, I could have been driving along this, going from Bandra to Mahim, and I would have seen these shops or anywhere else in Bombay. In the middle of this organized chaos, Mia sat smoking meditatively on a faded brocade and velvet discarded wedding reception throne, like an emperor who had renounced his empire and run away from it all. The wares had been arranged in a bizarre pattern with a logic of its own. Each morning, Mia rearranged everything like some stage setting of a social play, dusting them with the yellow rag. And with the seriousness of an actor performing a solo act, he sat for a while on one of the sofas, then moved to the throne or relaxed on a three-legged bed propped up with a pile of bricks. A huge tree stood nearby, providing occasional respite from the sun. Mia's shop stood as an oasis of peace amidst the rough and tumble of the noisy street over which he presided. One day, into this theatre of the absurd came an old wooden dressing table with a full-length mirror and an intricately etched frame supported on either side by carved rosewood peacocks, worn smooth with age. Mia placed this right in the middle of the shop, facing the busy street. As he polished the mirror, he saw reflections of huge trucks and buses suddenly rushing towards it and disappearing, making way for new ones. From then on, Mia watched, fascinated from dawn till dusk, the drama of daily life unfolding before him in the mirror. Even the sun seemed to take a peek at its reflection as it set. Mia usually dozed off, looking with half-closed eyes at the mirror from his three-legged bed as the shop was steeped in the twilight's golden afterglow. One afternoon, as he came awake from his siesta, Mia saw an amazing sight. Someone who looked like a celestial being stood running her delicate fingers through her freshly washed hair. Engrossed in her own reflection, she occasionally struck a pose or swayed to the music emanating from an old radio in the corner. Mia sat still, watching mesmerized, barely able to breathe. He dared not blink, afraid she would vanish from his sight. He could vaguely see her face. She exuded a mild fragrance of her own. Suddenly, Popert the tea boy came screaming in his high-pitched voice, "Chai, chai," hitting a coin against the aluminum kettle. Mia silently despaired, not knowing how to stop him. Just then, a red double-decker bus came thundering past, raising a curtain of dust behind which she seemed to disappear. When the dust settled, everything was as before. Her reflection had evaporated. Mia got up and walked with hesitant steps and looked everywhere, behind cupboards, beside the fridge. She wasn't there, but the faint scent that had wafted from her hair still hung in the air. So you'll have to buy the book to read, to see whether Mia finally is somehow able to make this relationship with this apparition who appears in his mirror work. And I think the reason I thought that was sort of an example for, talking about life is because, one, the description of the setting, you're really drawn into the place. And through that, all the different difficulties of living on the street like that come to mind. All the characters begin to appear as people you've passed by or you've seen or you've spoken to. And all the many things that you've perhaps avoided actually dealing with in interacting with people from many, many different walks of life suddenly begin to take on a different sort of a strength when you read a story like that. So it's not a life lesson, but it's an opening into a window of life.
Absolutely, ma'am. And we see how the story actually give readers compelling characters, drama, and descriptive language in a very compact package.
Yes, yes. I'm just showing off the cover again of this particular issue of Out of Print in which it appeared, which we always try to choose covers from the magazine that tell stories in themselves, and they're by artists. They're not illustrating, so obviously this is a non-figurative image, so it's very abstract. But this whole idea of an apparition in a mirror, it spoke to that a little bit. And so just tossing that out there.
Well, I think that was quite holistic, ma'am. Thank you so much for actually reading that out loud for us. And it had its own charm, actually, having
Thank
your personal touch to the presentation.
you. Oh,
Ma'am,
that's very nice of you. Thank you for saying that.
thank you so much, Indira, ma'am. One
Mhm.
last question, ma'am. How
Yes.
has your experiences been at the Kala Ghoda Art Festival? We see that you're the curator of the literature segment. And what have been your takeaways, your learnings the last few years as someone who has a major share in its execution?
Oh, that's such an exciting question. Thank you so much for asking me that. And while I answer that, I'm going to toss up the cover for the story from by Gangadhar Gadgil. The issue in which it appeared, because since we were talking about street life in Bombay, this is this fantastic picture by Sudhir Patwardhan, which has everything happening. It's the street. You have a bus that is dashing off. You have a scooter going by, and the woman is clutching onto him. Is it because of the traffic? Is it love? Is it tenderness? The guy who's just gotten off the bus, is he going into the house opposite? And the people up on the right-hand corner looking up the street, or he's looking up the street, and she's watching the music lesson on the other side. And then, right in the middle, you have a kitchen scene. So, I mean, I love this. And in a way, it segues into answering your question because the Kalakura Festival is all about, it's a free festival that's open to everyone in the city or from outside, indeed. And it's an extraordinary thing because during non-COVID times, it's just jam-packed with people. And there are many different verticals to the festival. There's music, there's dance, there are different stages all over the overall Kalakura area. But literature takes place in the David Sassoon Library, which is an old library in Bombay, which was set up by the old Baghdadi Jew family, the Sassoon family. And there's a wonderful statue of David Sassoon himself as you enter, and you go past the statue to this courtyard, which all these old trees overlooked by Elphinstone College on one side and the Bombay courts on the other. And right in that atmosphere with books around you and all of these lovely old Mumbai institutions, the literature festival takes place. And so what we try to do at the festival, and I'm very grateful to Ranjit Hoskote, who handed the baton to me a few years ago. He, of course, is, beyond excellent at bringing together the most wonderful people to speak at the festival. But what we try to do is to celebrate the city and then open our eyes to the nation, to the boundaries, to the world. And we also try to offer a very broad range of work that can interest many different people, both fiction, non-fiction, always a lot of poetry, because I think Bombay, Mumbai has always been the seat of a lot of poetry in different languages, Marathi, of course, but also Hindi and English. And then we open to other languages because, again, like in a sense, a cosmopolitan city like Mumbai or Bangalore, they tend to have and certainly any city in India has populations, old and new, who speak many different languages. So we try to offer other language programs as well, and panels from all over the place. But the main core of it is to really celebrate the written word, and we want to have people who are academic scholars, who are literary giants, young writers, writers who are blogging but not even going into the print word, writers who are writing memoiresque things, celebrating their own lives or the city. And it's 9 days of intense and exciting events taking place in the David Sassoon Courtyard Library. I think one of the highlights, since I had mentioned Section 377 before, I think one of our great highlights was to have Justice D.Y. Chandrachud to come and speak. And now you could say he's not a writer per se, because I'm sure he's written books, but in that sense, we weren't celebrating something that he had printed. Actually, I don't even know if he has. I should check into that. But the reason we had him was Section 377 had just a few months before that been removed from the and same-sex love had been decriminalized. And the verdict, I don't know if any of you has read it, but the verdict that was written by Justice Chandrachud was very, very beautiful. You know, it was like a work of literary art in itself, just examining why it is that we don't want the state to direct whom we love. And it was terribly moving, actually. So then we decided that that was such a momentous thing in the country, but also it was such a beautiful piece of writing. So we asked him, and of course, I mean, there was so much going on at the time. The Sabarimala verdict was happening, and he had just gone on to the panel for Ayodhya as well. So he was very, very, very busy, and in fact, his personal secretary said to me, "I don't know, ma'am, if you're going to be able to do this." But he was wonderful because he said he had lived in Mumbai and loved the Kala Ghoda Festival, he and his wife. And so he made time to come over just for the evening to speak to us. And it was a fantastic speech about the nature of law and art in a way. And so it was terribly moving. And so, you know, one has exciting moments like that. There are so many, I can go on forever. But I think, well, you're all organizing a festival. You know how every part of it is sometimes hard. There's so much organizing, but it's also terribly inspiring because you come across exciting things. And so, yes. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that. It was lovely. It's lovely revisiting because right now it's what I'm thinking about, the Kala Ghoda Festival. So it's nice. You know, it's very difficult having the Kala Ghoda Festival, which is so place-centric. It's so city-centric. It's so about the Kala Ghoda area, the old part of the city of Bombay, of the city of Mumbai, that it's very difficult. The virtual representation of it somehow is, you know, it's very difficult to sort out. So that's where we are with it right now.
Brilliant, ma'am. We felt as if you're actually having, experiencing the vibrance and the vim and the vigor of the Kala Ghoda Arts Festival with that description. Thank you so much, ma'am. And with that, we come to the end of today's exciting episode, exciting discussion on, your experiences as an editor and actually getting a glimpse of the anthologies on short stories. And I take this opportunity, Indira ma'am, to thank you, to profusely to express my gratitude for your experiences, insights, ideas on literature. And on behalf of Orange Literary Festival, I thank you for being here with us, for devoting your priceless time, and more importantly, cherry on the cake, your experiences, along with the screen shares and the readings that you shared with us. Thank you so much. And we wish you all the brilliance and magnificence in life, ma'am. You're truly an epitome of inspiration.
Oh,
And you stand as a testimony to the fact that age is just a number when it comes to being passionate about something that you do in life. Thank
yeah,
you
so
so
thank you for
much, ma'am.
saying that. I know it's so funny because you've said such nice things, but I always, because I entered literature a little older, many of my colleagues and friends in literature are much younger in age than I am, but mentally I connect with them. So I sort of forget that I'm older sometimes. So thank you for saying that. I just want to thank again the Orange City Festival, if you'll allow me to do that, and for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Westland Books and Context Books for publishing the anthology, and for being so wonderfully supportive. The Outprint team, Brothers Twain, our sponsors. I would like to, yes, I'm just so pleased to have been part of this. I just want to share this one more screen with you, if you'll permit me to drag on for just a second, with all the covers that we had at the 10th year. We put all the covers together that we had for the Outprint magazine. And so that was all.
Ma'am, you're on mute at the moment. Could you please unmute your device?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Was all of that lost, or just this last bit?
No, ma'am. This is the last bit.
Okay, so sorry. I think my finger must have hit my keypad. I have a new computer, and so it's a bit. My old one got so shaky that this is a little bit sensitive. So thank you so much. Do go out and buy the anthology, because there are wonderful stories in it. And Swaima, you've been a fantastic moderator. Thank you so very much. I know you're doing 1 million different
so
things,
much,
and so it's such a pleasure to have talked to you. Thank you so much to the organizers, to the university, to the Orange City Festival, and our lovely anchor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Best wishes to you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
At the outset, I would like to thank Ms. Indira Chandrashekhar and Ms. Swaima Ahmed for joining us today. We wish we get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we are all today. And for my dear massive audience, I'm sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking home an enriched version of yourself, as just as I will. Thank you for joining us today. Until I see you again, this is Sanjeevani Meshram signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Raisoni Group, a vision beyond.